random walks occur much more frequently in cooking than just in things like spherification. And in fact, next week we will learn a lot about how this concept of a random walk is really critical for understanding heat transfer and the heating of foods, which of course is very central to cooking. So in a minute, you're about to see a demonstration by America's Test Kitchen in which they show you another way that random walks are important in cooking in perhaps a surprising context. America's Test Kitchen will show you how they make coleslaw, and what they will tell you is that the way that it works is that you of course take cabbage or vegetables and you mix them up into a wonderful dish, with some sauce to make coleslaw. And you all might know from your experience that when you do this, that it can become watery. They will explain to you why it becomes watery and tell you how to avoid it. And the critical idea in their recipe involves the idea of a random walk. And I just want to take a second before you watch them to sort of explain how that comes up. And this involves the physical idea of osmosis. So let me explain to you what osmosis is. So let's imagine that you have a membrane. And the membrane in the America's Test Kitchen video is going to correspond to the cell wall of a plant. So I've just drawn a blue membrane for you. And let's imagine that the membrane separates two compartments which have different amounts of a salt or something in them. So I'm going to draw the salt as like little green particles. So on this side, you have lots of little green particles, and these are salts. And on this side, you don't have very many. Now, there is a driving force. So what osmosis means is there's a driving force to try to equilibrate the concentrations of salt on the two sides of the membrane. So what one would like is on this side of the membrane, one would like the concentration of salt to be the same as on this side of the membrane. Now it turns out that most membranes, like cell walls and things, are not permeable to salt. So there's basically no way to take this salt ion or this salt ion and make it cross the membrane. The membrane will simply not allow it. But what can happen is that the water that basically the salt is suspended in can traverse the membrane. And osmosis is basically the idea that what will happen in a situation like the one that we've drawn here is that the water will go from this side of the membrane, where there's lots of salt molecules, to this side of the membrane, which will then, oh no, I got it backwards. It will go from this side of the membrane, where there are a few salt molecules, to this side of the membrane, which will essentially cause the concentration of salt on this side to become equilibrated with this side. So water will flow to equilibrate the salt concentrations. And this is the idea of osmosis, and this is central to the recipe that you will hear from America's Test Kitchen. Now, the one thing to say, so what does this have to do with random walks? Well, what it has to do with random walks is that you have to ask yourself how the water knows that it should move from this side to this side. And the way that it knows is that it does a random walk. So you could imagine that if you were a little water molecule jiggling around here, you would jiggle around like a random walk, and every once in a while you would go across the membrane, and you would say, hey, it's better over here, I have less salt. And if that keeps, so if that keeps going on, then eventually what will happen is that the water will equilibrate and that the two concentrations on the two sides will be equal. So this is another way that random walks and diffusion are important in cooking, and you will see in the next video this explained in much more detail with a beautiful recipe from America's Test Kitchen.